World History Discussions, Chapter 6, Part 11, and the third and final part on the Andean cultures of South America. So we talked about Chavan de Huántar from about the year 1000 to its decline around 300 BCE. And then around 200 BCE, the population booms and all these cities start to spring up in the Andean coast of South America. So before we go into the civilizations that come after the Chavan culture, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what would usually happen. As I mentioned, this region is not only cut off from Mesoamerica, it's also cut off from itself, with large mountains and river valleys where only intensive agriculture can work, and the river valleys are totally separate from other river valleys, but occasionally conquerors would unify separate river valleys and link the regions together. And they would do this with force. Each region would then contribute products to the valley's larger economy. And if you know anything about geography, the Andes Mountains are the second highest mountains in the world, second only to the Himalayas. So you're talking like 2 to 3 miles above sea level here, and this close to the Pacific Ocean is amazing. The Pacific Ocean's sea level, so you really had 3 levels. Also, you're pretty near the equator, so it's warm and tropical down here, and then it's freezing up in the Andes Mountains, and there's this kind of in-between zone in the middle. So you would have the highlands, which produced potatoes, llama meat, and alpaca wool, and then you have the central valleys supplying maize, beans, and squashes, and then you would have the coastal regions providing sweet potatoes, fish, and cotton. And as I mentioned, there's no writing, and so the beliefs, values, and way of life in early Andean societies remains unknown for the most part. However, art can give us some insight, and here's a little piece of Moche art. So the first culture to emerge right out of Chavan de Huántar, but you got to skip about 500 years because Chavan declines around the year 300 BCE, so I guess skip 600 years, and then you got Moche culture from about 300 CE to 700 CE. And most of what we know about Moche culture comes from their artwork on surviving pottery vessels, which includes portraits of individuals' heads, major gods, scenes from daily life such as aristocrats on a hunting expedition, warriors leading captives bound by ropes, women doing work with textiles under the eye of a careful supervisor, and rulers receiving messengers from ambassadors of neighboring states. But around 600 or 700 CE, right around the same time, the Mayans declined 3,000 miles to the north of there for similar reasons. You also had droughts in South America, and that probably brought down the Moche culture. So now there's a few others. I got my notes right here. There's a few others cultures in here. One that also completely misses the book. This is from 370 BCE to 450 CE, and that is the Nazca culture. Ancient aliens, anybody? Yep, they drew these lines in the sand, but the lines are only visible from the air, and they kind of look like flying birds. That's just one of those weird things. And yes, it completely misses the textbook, but I thought I would mention it. And then we just did talk about the Moche culture, and then they had contemporaries in Tiwanaku in Bolivia. You can see it on the map, but it's not in purple, but it's not talked about in the textbook. But there's beautiful Lake Titicaca, Bolivia, where Tiwanaku culture was, and then I believe we will talk about it in chapter 20, but out of the ashes of the Moche culture came the Chimnu culture. They had their rise around 700 CE, right around when Tiwanaku died off, and they lasted until 1460 when the Incas conquered them. And the Incas will be the first civilization to unite all of this Andes Mountains region, over 2,000-mile empire, but that's not until chapter 20. So basically a quick little summary then of this region of the world in terms of the timeline. 1000 to 300 BCE, Chavan culture. 370 BCE to 450 CE, not in the book, but Nazca culture. Then 300 to 700 CE, Moche culture. And then when you get to 700 to 1460 CE, Chimu culture, which is what comes out of Moche culture. And then Tiwanaku, 300 to 1000. Woohoo!